everyone, so I'm going to be making a video today about my C-section. First I'm going to tell you about my labor story. At 5:15 p.m. on July 4th, I went in to get an induction. I was induced with Cervidil, which is the vaginal induction. Then they sent me home and they said normally it doesn't work the first time, it usually takes 2 or 3 tries and to come back in 12 hours. And they also told me that if the contractions were getting too close together, then the Cervidil wasn't working properly and to pull it out and try again in the morning. So I went home and I started having contractions. They weren't regular, so I wasn't too concerned about it. At 9 p.m. I started getting the most excruciating back pain. I was having a complete back labor. Like I could hardly feel contractions in my front, just in my back, and it was excruciating. So I went into the hospital, and because my contractions were about 3 minutes apart, and they gave me T3s and said I was still 1 centimeter dilated, so I should go back home. At 1:30 a.m. The contractions were getting really close together, and so I went back into the hospital and they gave me morphine and I was only 3 centimeters dilated, and they sent me home again. Around 8:30 in the morning, I was still in excruciating pain. I had taken out my Cervidil insert because my contractions had gotten so close together. They were pretty much one on top of each other, and it was really, really painful. Like, imagine like you have a contraction and then you get a break and a contraction and a break. Well, mine were getting so close together, it was like contraction, 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 contraction. Like I literally would have like maybe 3 seconds of a break instead of 3 minutes. So at 8:30 a.m. I went back in. I was still 3 centimeters dilated, so they gave me another shot of morphine to try and help with the pain. They didn't reinsert the Cervidil because I was clearly already in active labor. So they sent me home. And around 11:30 a.m. I started to hemorrhage, which means I was completely bleeding out. Like it wasn't just a little bit of blood, I was like really, really bleeding. I had pretty much filled up my whole toilet with blood. And this is because my contractions, they were like that, basically became like this. I had one contraction that would not go away, and it started compressing the baby. Like my uterus literally just one contraction and held it. As a result of that, I hemorrhaged. My husband had to call an ambulance, and I was rushed to the hospital. I arrived there about 11:30 a.m. I was 8 centimeters dilated by noon. Around 1:45, the Amberley's oxygen stats, the O2 stats, started to drop, and her heart rate started to flatline on the fetal heart rate monitor. So my OB started to panic. They told me I'm going to need a C-section because the baby's not getting any oxygen because, again, my uterus was squishing her so that she wasn't able to get any oxygen. At 2 o'clock, they started prepping me for the C-section. At 2:20, the surgery began. At 2:25 is when Amberley was born. When she was born, she was not breathing. She did not start crying. It took her full 3 minutes to start breathing. When she was born, they bagged her, which means they manually started pumping air into her with like, well, it's like a bag. And then they gave her the Narcan shot. And after she received the Narcan shot and the additional bagging, she started to breathe after 3 minutes. That was the longest, scariest 3 minutes of my life. So then she was taken out of the room so she could have her Apgar test, get the antibiotic eye drops, all that kind of stuff, and I continued on with the surgery. So that is pretty much the condensed version of my labor story, as fast as I could get it done, because that's not really what this video is about. So, my C-section was an emergency C-section. There's 2 kinds. There's a prepared and planned C-section, and there's an emergency C-section, which is what I had. In a planned C-section, you know ahead of time, the doctors can take their time, it's prepped, you're scheduled, all that kind of stuff. My surgery, I had to get it done or my baby was not going to survive, or I wasn't going to survive, either or, because I was hemorrhaging and needed blood transfusions during the surgery because I was losing so much blood. My baby wasn't breathing. It was a disaster. Like that's pretty much the epitome of an emergency C-section. So, about the C-section. So when they started prepping me for the C-section, they put this orange goop stuff all over my belly, which is to sanitize it and sterilize it. And I'm just going to tell you that that orange goopy stuff, even when you wash it off, that stuff will dye your skin. So be prepared to have an orange belly and thighs for like 3 weeks, because that stuff does not come off. So they took me into the surgery room. In the surgery room, there was like 15 to 20 people. It is pretty packed in there. There was a ton of nurses. There was 2 nurses from the maternity ward. There was a NICU nurse, because Amberly had to spend her first 9 hours of life in neonatal intensive care unit. There was a scrub nurse, which is the surgery nurse. There was a pediatrician. There was an obstetrician, there was a surgeon, there was an anesthesiologist, there was my doctor, there was my husband, and myself. I think that pretty much covered everybody. I'm probably missing a few people. All I know is that room is packed. Before I went in for the surgery, I forgot to mention this, but I got an epidural. So when they give you an epidural, I didn't realize this, but I thought it was just a needle they put into your spine, injected some fluid, and you were numb from the waist down. But that's not what it is. When they give you an epidural, it's actually, they run an IV into your spinal fluid, and the line goes up and there's a bag where the anesthesiologist controls how much anesthetics you're getting. So it's actually an IV that goes into your spine. I didn't know that. So after they started giving me the anesthetics in the epidural, it feels like water is running down your back and then you're numb. I'm told most people don't feel anything from the waist down. For me, I could still feel pressure. Like, I still felt the need to push, and I could still feel my contractions, but they weren't painful. I just felt the pressure, if that makes any sense. So when I went into surgery, for me, to get Amberly out took 5 minutes. It was extremely rushed. They were trying to basically save my life and her life, so it was extremely rushed. But in the event of a planned C-section, it would be more, like, it would take probably 15 to 20 minutes to get the baby out versus 5. And what they do is they start cutting into you layer by layer. First they'll do the skin, then they'll do the fat, then they'll do muscle tissue, then they'll do another layer of fat, then they'll cut into the uterus, and that's how they do it, layer by layer. And when they do it, you don't feel the pain because you're numb, you're under anesthetic. But what it feels like is if you push on your arm decently hard, like not hard enough that it really hurts, but decently hard so you feel pressure, that's what it feels like, but all over your belly. And it'll feel like that throughout the entire C-section, because they are cutting into you and they're moving you apart, they're pulling you apart, moving organs out of the way so that they can get to the baby. But you can't feel pain, so it just feels like this for the entire surgery. What I didn't realize is that because I had been given morphine, nobody had ever told me this. None of my doctors, none of my prenatal classes, nobody had ever mentioned that if you take morphine while you're in labor, there is a chance that it'll make your baby not breathe when it's born. I had no idea, and that's why they had the Narcan shot ready in the surgery room. And I guess they have it ready when you do deliveries vaginally too, because apparently the effect makes the baby so groggy that it won't breathe. And the Narcan shot basically countereffects the morphine. So I had no idea, otherwise I would never have taken morphine. I didn't know that was a possibility. But they give the baby the Narcan shot, which will counteract the effects. And so I didn't know that. I think everybody should know that. I don't know why doctors don't tell you. I don't know why prenatal classes don't tell you. But if you take morphine, there is a chance your baby's not going to breathe when it's born. So anyways, back to the C-section. After they got Amberly out, they rushed her off with my husband with maternity and NICU nurses to go get her tests done and make sure she was okay and everything. And they started sewing me back together. I think in total they had over 100 stitches inside of me, because they sew you back together layer by layer. They just don't do big stitches. They like individually layer by layer. So I think there was over 100 stitches inside of me and 20 staples on the outside. So when that was done, and after the anesthetics had worn off, and probably the next morning, I was pretty sore. Like, I couldn't really get up. You have a catheter, so you don't have to get up to go pee, because your pee runs into the little bag. And just, like, I always thought getting a catheter would hurt to take out, but it doesn't. It just falls out when they take it out. It's really weird, but you can't feel it at all. But it's pretty neat to have, because I didn't have to go to the bathroom for like 2 whole days. So that was pretty cool. And they do that because after a C-section, I mean, it's hard to walk. But the best thing you can do after a C-section is try to walk. I would stumble around the maternity ward at the hospital I was at, and basically I would just slowly walk, holding onto a rail, because it is hard to sit up, it's hard to walk, but it's the best thing to do because it gets the blood flow going and helps you heal. You don't realize what you use your abdominal muscles for until they've been severed in half. Like, you use it to sit, you use it to stand, you use it to walk, you use it to cough, you use it to laugh. Like, all that stuff hurts for about 5 days is when it's really sore. Before I left the hospital, they removed the staples, sorry, and they say after the 3 days that the skin's already healed back together, and it's okay to take the staples out. But they put steri strips or butterfly tape on over top, just in case you overexert yourself and you wind up tearing a little bit. This is a picture of what I look like with the staples. And when they take out the staples, I thought it would hurt, but really all it feels is a pinch. Like, it hurts less than any piercing, and I'm sure if you have a tattoo, I don't have one, but I'm sure if you do, it would hurt less than that too. It literally just feels like a pinch. And I was so scared it was gonna hurt, so that was a huge relief that it didn't hurt. I'd say after 2 weeks, I felt completely healed. Like, I didn't feel like I was hindered at all by the C-section. My steri strips fell off after 4 weeks. I wound up peeling them off. I think the doctors tell you that it's supposed to come off between 2 and 3 weeks during bathing, because when you wash it, they're supposed to fall off, and I guess people bath it more vigorously than I did, because it was tender, so I was gentle with it. And it took 4 weeks. I wound up just peeling them off. And after 6 weeks, you're completely healed, according to the doctors. But I felt completely healed after 2 weeks. So I'm going to show you what it looks like after I was healed.